Are you new to Path of Exile 2, just like me? Here's a Diablo 4 player's perspective with a ton of classes and terminology comparison. Now, obviously, those two games are very, very different, but there are still some similarities, I think, that will help to make the game better understandable for new players, especially if you come from the Diablo 4 sphere, just like me, and many people here around that are going to be playing Path of Exile 2. So probably the biggest decision that you have to make in Path of Exile is your class choice and your ascendancies. And there certainly are some similarities. Now, recently, GGG has published like all the ascendancy notes for all the different classes, so you can make an informed decision. And I'm just going to compare them here to you, like how the playstyle like kind of feels on a very, very base level. Now, there's obviously a lot of like nuances that you can make use of during the end game in Path of Exile, and there's in general a lot of ways to customize your builds. But what it boils down to basically here, we have the Barbarian in Diablo 4. This is my favorite, my main class, and this is at least somewhat similar to the Warrior. Though the main difference is the Warrior can still use a shield, but you also have this like two-hand, like big slam kind of playstyle that you can use with like earthquakes, and there's like even a Hammer of the God setup that I might play. So there's definitely like a lot of comparison in terms of like playstyle, how the classes feel. Just like that the Warrior has this like defensive tool as well with a shield that we are probably lacking in Diablo 4. So it's going to be a pretty cool and fun transition here for me. This is most likely going to be my starter class, the Warrior, with the Titan Ascendancy here, with some big damage. And there's even another comparison, because on the skill tree, there is a node that allows the Warrior to equip two-handed weapons, just like the Barbarian can in Diablo 4. So there's certainly a lot of similarities. Now, note that the Druid is not going to be in the game in Path of Exile yet, but the Druid is obviously the Druid in Path of Exile 2 as well. Then next here we have the Necromancer, and there's not like a traditional Necromancer class, but you basically have the Witch, which is also focused around summoning like minions, summoning skeletons, and summoning like different mages and undead creatures to fight by your side. There's even like a blood ascendancy where you can use, similar to the Necromancer, where you can use, instead of mana or resources, you can use your life to cast spells. This is like, it reminds me very much of, you know, all the blood powers that the Necromancer has in Diablo 4. So again, a lot of similarities here. Next here we have the Rogue, the like ranged like bow and arrow class. It's somewhat similar to the Ranger in terms of bow and arrow, and even to some degree to the Mercenary that uses a crossbow. Now, I think the Mercenary will offer like a lot different playstyle, like more like a shooter, especially with the WASD movement in Path of Exile 2. But the Ranger to me is like very comparable here to the Rogue, especially like the ranged builds that you have in Diablo 4. So I think Jonathan said the Ranger's fantasy is basically playing a Legolas from Lord of the Rings, like in a video game. So I think this class is going to be a ton of fun. You also have like a ton of explosives and some close combats as well on the Mercenary side. And there are in general a lot of like poison dots, you know, that the Rogue can do in Diablo 4 with Andariels and all kinds of things. And the Ranger can do, is very focused on like this poison, like chaos damage that exists there as well. And then you can also have this like Gemling Legionnaire that you can specialize in for your ascendancy. So again, you want to choose these really careful, because you can't like re-choose them. Like you can't change them once you've already chosen. But I think the Witch Hunter here has the best fantasy for somewhat of a rogue. And in the end, the Ranger is like kind of like an even more similar transition here. And there's like this Deadeye one here with like a lot of precision, and this is like a true like ranged like snipe type of character. I think that's gonna be pretty strong. Next, obviously, we have the Sorcerer, is also the Sorcerer in Path of Exile 2. You have like all these like different elements attacks, especially with the Stormweaver here. This is like one of the ascendancies that focuses a lot on elemental damage. Like you have a shock, fire, and cold. While there is also the Chronomancer, And this is like something that's not necessarily in Diablo 4, where you have like some crazy possibilities here, like to freeze time, to manipulate cooldowns, and do all kinds of crazy things. I think it's going to be a pretty versatile class. But if you want like a closer feeling to the Sorcerer, which feels really good in Diablo 4, you might want to consider going for the Storm Reaver here, basically evolving a lot around elements. You also have these like kind of crazy nodes here that basically stack your mana very crazy, so you can stack damage with your mana, with your intelligence, and you can basically deal like a ton of damage during these parts of the game. And then one more comparison that we have here before we jump into the terminology is, and this one I don't like 100% agree with, but like to some degree there are some similarities, is the Spiritborn in Diablo 4 compared to the Monk in Path of Exile 2. So you still have like, you know, this quarterstaff, like kind of like melee, dual wield playstyle. Like they don't really use fist weapons on the Spiritborn, and you also don't really use any fist weapons on the Monk. This is also like a very like melee focused class, but you also have a lot of like caster abilities where you can basically like use a bunch of like different elements. Now it's not like nature elements on the Monk, it's more like, you know, lightning and cold damage that the Monk is doing, like being like this meditative, like holy warrior basically. That is pretty strong. And the Monk also has like a darkness side on it, like, you know, the Spiritborn has more like a jungle theme, and the Monk, like with one of the ascendancy, is a bit more like focused on the, here the Acolyte of Chayula is a bit more focused like on the darkness side of things with like a lot of lifesteal and stuff. But again, like all very melee focused, very fast pace, just like the Spiritborn, and also potentially very strong. We'll see, probably not as much damage as you can do on the Spiritborn in Diablo 4. But if you enjoy this kind of like, you know, melee playstyle, like in the face of the enemies with more fast pace, then the Monk is for you. I was actually considering like long time if I'm going to start Monk or the Warrior. I'm still not 100% decided, because the Warrior is like a little bit slower, but therefore does like a lot more like brachial, like more bigger hits. And we like big hits. There might be even like a one-shot build with the Hammer of the Gods. We'll see how that's going to go. And then we also compiled like some terminology here. In terms of like what things mean in Path of Exile compared to Diablo, basically. And there are a lot of similarities here. Probably the best and biggest one here is vulnerable, being shock. So in Path of Exile, you have a thing called ailments that basically apply like usually a debuff to the monster. And you know, you also have these debuff in Diablo 4. It's called vulnerable. You know, the enemies take 20% more damage as long as the vulnerable is on the monster in Diablo. And this is very similar to the shock ailment of Path of Exile. So if you apply shock to an enemy, it actually takes 30% damage from everybody. This also includes party members. Just like in Diablo 4, it's just 20% more damage in Diablo 4 as long as it's vulnerable, and it's 30% 1.3 multiplier for shock in Path of Exile. And I think like this, it's gonna be very nice for new players to kind of like learn the game with like some of these like similarities here. Like, you know, the burn that you can do on a Sorcerer is similar to the ignite ailment that you can inflict in Path of Exile. Like one difference here is that to inflict those ailments, those ignites, for example, in Diablo 4, you just have a chance to inflict them, but in Path of Exile 2, you also need to do a ton of damage to have a higher chance to inflict them. So they are very correlated with your DPS numbers, basically preventing, you know, any kind of like support build, or I mean, not any kind, but preventing like a lot of support ZDPS builds, which is very cool. And then we have poison, basically just like being poison / chaos damage. Like it's just basically a norm here for damage over time in Path of Exile. We have a dodge in Diablo 4, like you dodge something. And in Path of Exile, it's called evasion, basically. It's evasion rating, like your chance to dodge an attack, basically. And then you have execute in Diablo 4, like this is usually against lesser enemies. And in Path of Exile, you have culling strike. And culling strike is basically the same as execute. You also have like a percentage range, like like normal trash monsters, you can like execute or cull at 20%. So once they're live, drops below 20%, you proc this culling strike, you would execute them, like it kill them immediately. It goes down all the way. I think elites is like, you know, 10%, and then at bosses and unique elites, it's just like 5% to execute. But if you have culling strikes in Path of Exile 2, if the boss is below the 5% threshold, it'll just execute them. It will instantly kill them. Then there are the healing potions. This is basically just going to be your flask. You have 1 mana, 1 life flask. They simplified it a lot in Path of Exile 2. And they don't restore on cooldown though, like in Diablo 4. You need to actually kill monsters to get your potions back. I think this is going to be very helpful for newer players, especially during the campaign playthrough, like when you kill monsters and then you restore your flasks. Then you also have like this lifesteal that we had is Leech in Path of Exile 2, but the Leech also can apply to mana and to energy. Then we already talked about Vulnerable and Shock. And then the last thing is here Slow is Hinder, Maim. Because there's also something in Path of Exile basically, which is Chill, which affects their action speed. And that's the difference to Diablo 4. Their action speed is not only the movement speed, but also their attack speed. So that is like the Chill is like the next version of Slow. In Diablo 4, like Chill and Slow is kind of the same thing. But here Slow just means Hinder, Maim. And actually Chill is the next highest part where you not only slowing the movement speed, but you're also slowing their attack speed. Basically making it much easier to survive because those can't hit you. And we will have a ton of more stuff going on like this here with some friends here over at Mobalytics. They helped me with this sheet as well. There's Kripparrian, there are like a lot of other awesome creators as well. And we're gonna have some starter guides here on the websites. There's already like an overview here. There is like a cool, there will be some cool beginner guides and so on and so forth right here on Mobalytics on the Path of Exile section. So I'm very much looking forward to that and compiling, some more like easy to use sheets like this. I'm gonna have a link to all of that in the description. You can just like bookmark this and just take a look and really think about which class you start. And I really hope this video helps you. It's a big decision and kind of like, getting the playstyles, because I know there are a lot of players, call them the Diablo 4 refugees, if you will, that are coming over from Diablo 4, checking out Path of Exile for the first time. And I hope this really helps you to kind of get like a bit of an understanding of, which class you might be interested in. Choose wisely, my friends, but in the end, I think all of the classes are looking fantastic. And I've heard like every day somebody else saying this class in the Ascendancy looks OP. No, this one looks OP. So I think like obviously something will be the best, but there's no clear winner. And I think there's going to be at least a good class balance. That is the goal. And the developers seem very actively to like nerf or fix or buff outliers of that. If there's something that's extremely OP, they'll probably nerf it like within a few hours. And if something is underperforming and struggling, they'll probably buff it in a few hours. So I'm very much looking forward to rock the launch. We'll also have drops enabled here on the Twitch channel that I'm also going to link below. So I hope you find this helpful, guys. Let's go. PoE log in almost less than 2 days. Let's go.